We did it. Us to announce it. All right. Hello, friends and colleagues, and make sure we look at the owl and not at my computer because that doesn't help anybody. Welcome back to Conversations with the Curator.
Season 2.
Season 2. God, we've been doing this a whole year, and this year, December falls on Christmas Eve and not Christmas Day. So Sarah and Tim Christmas special. Hi, you should know now. We're a bunch of history nerds, and that's about inevitably where these conversations lead. So Conversations with the Curator is a monthly behind the scenes look into our collections, our exhibits, and our curiosities. Really hard to believe that it's our second year of this. So before we start, thank you to all of you for coming back, or if you're new, I do see a couple new folks in the chat. So thank you for supporting us, for tuning in live and by watching. And of course, we have to say liking and subscribing for the algorithm. It really does help us see what kind of content people like to see and what you're interested in and the topics that matter to you. Which brings us to today's discussion on our exhibit, Warehouse Valley. As we are actually sitting in the exhibit. I am joined by my colleague, Tim Betz, our curator of exhibitions, and we are discussing your feedback around this exhibit. When I say your feedback, I mean your feedback. Y'all see this?
So sit down.
I'm not even
relax.
looking at the screen here.
Yeah.
Let's do that so you can actually see it. Like that is a hefty chunk of feedback. So
And kind of as a note on the feedback too, that is, people literally fill that out at this table we're sitting at now.
yes,
We've just kind of co-opted this table. And I think what's actually really cool about that, and I think this is going to be a recurring theme of today, it is a place for people to tell us how they feel about the development and changes in the Lehigh Valley.
right.
But when this exhibit is over, a time that is approaching, this is coming down in July, those are going to be put in our archive. So while they are a answer to this exhibit about a very contemporary thing, right? The idea of development in the Lehigh Valley and, dare I say, warehouses, they are also being saved for later, right? Because that right there is going to be a very useful historical document for someone 100 years from now that does like Warehouse Valley 2.0. Right. So it's really an important primary source generated by the community. So I think that's very exciting.
The fact that people care so deeply about this issue, like it was astounding to me when we first opened it and the feedback where people were coming up to the front desk where I'm primarily based out of and thanking us for addressing this. And then from there, it has only gotten better and better and better. I've had a woman come in multiple times over the last week to update me about a warehouse. You know what? That's what we're here
People
for.
end up telling you a lot about different warehouses.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So if you have any questions throughout the conversation as we are talking, I only ask that you use the chat feature in Zoom itself rather than unmuting your microphone. That way, when we go to specifically caption YouTube and when we want to record all of your comments, I want to make sure that I'm getting your comments as accurately as I can. So this really just helps us with accessibility. So we've got a lot to cover today, so let's just swing right on into the weeds of it. Let's talk a little bit first, just to get the ground covered, what we mean when we say warehousing. Because warehousing doesn't necessarily mean manufacturing or light industry, for example. What is like the difference between, say, an Amazon and a Victaulic or a Beeler, and why is that difference important, especially in this context?
Well, I think nuance is always important. Which is a thing we do.
It's another conversation.
Recurring themes, right? But B, I mean, there are different kinds. Warehouses have this same kind of general function, right? Which is a place for stuff to be stored before it enters kind of broader, consumer streams, shall we say, which feels very jargony, but let's go with it. But there is differences, right? Because what we're seeing in the Valley are warehouses that are for large national and in fact international organizations. And then there are warehouses for local businesses, right? And that is equally important, but they're also equal, I mean, they're different origin points, right? They're different where the business is located. And in many ways, sometimes they're different in the support those businesses give their local community.
Right.
I think that's kind of important as well, right? So I think it's like there are a lot of warehouses. They are owned by a variety of different people, but I think there is nuance that is necessary in this discussion, right? Because it's like a local business needs a warehouse to do their business. And very often they see the importance of supporting their community, right? Whereas sometimes large multinational corporations also need warehouses as part of their supply chain. They can also be community minded, but sometimes less locally so. Right. And like to that same end with like the nuance, right? So it's like, we were always like talking about Amazon in this exhibit, right? But it's like Amazon, it's this kind of vast organization.
That's probably the most extreme example.
Right, it's the extreme example, but it's like the classic one, right? And it's like, I mean, it's not necessarily run by Jeff Bezos anymore, but it's like one central element of it running this large organization. Whereas if you have like a local company that is a local business that is operating a business here, right? But I think what's also very important is both of those, right? These large scale warehouses by large scale multinational conglomerates and local businesses, they both employ local people, right? So that's another element of this as well. So I think like any actual discussion of this exhibit, and I think in a way that is meaningful to think of this as some conversation we're raising, right? Is that like, we need to look at this and we can all have our very different, we can all sorts of opinions about it. Those opinions can range from apathetic to angry, right? But like, I think
we're humans with emotions.
We're humans with emotions after all. But I think those opinions are best had with nuance. Which is true of everything, right? Nuance exists, and we kind of need to, I think that's something we need to continue to say.
Right, like almost as if it's a part of our job as historians to.
We like that nuance there.
Anyway, I do get very nervous about things like, yes. And especially when you're writing and you get very sassy about like, while I recognize such and such's opinion, however.
Deep in dissertation land, and that's where I live now. A sassy footnote.
Yes. Do love a sassy footnote. So another critical piece of this exhibit, which we saw when we read through everyone's comments, is not only how nuanced the issue is, but how much people are very aware of both sides of the issue. And I really appreciate that as someone who I realized I wasn't as in the weeds with the exhibit as you were, but being able to see that we are effectively doing what we set out to do, which is to spark conversation.
Great. Yeah, I think I found it very, with anything, like as a curator, when you're doing this work, the idea of creating a blank card for someone to write on, that is that's kind of a scary thing to do, right?
Yeah.
It is, it really is. But they're very thoughtful. And there's some that are more thoughtful than others, right? But there's definitely a wide array of nuance. I think there's definitely, you can tell people gone through and they understood what we're doing, right? Because our goal here, our goal here is to present it, to present this kind of historical moment in which we're living really in the broader context of the Lehigh Valley's longer history, right? And I think that's
the next question.
Yeah, if there's something about this exhibit I think I'm really kind of proud of, I think it's that, right? That it like contextualizes this moment in a longer history. But, like that requires a wide amount of nuance.
Right.
Again, back to the nuance.
Right. Again, and when I was reading over these this weekend, trying to see like, are there patterns that we could recognize? And I'm a social historian, I'm a big fan of finding common themes and finding patterns. But your comments ranged everywhere from environmental devastation, economic impact. And as historians, it's our job to take those nuances and say, yes, but how have we seen this before? What can we learn from the last time we had similar conversations?
Precisely.
Now, as we talk about this pretty regularly on this program, the Lehigh Valley was settled in part because it's always been a transportation hub. That's
Absolutely.
why we settled here in the first place. It's also famously seen a decline fairly recently in heavy industry, most notably Bethlehem Steel. And I just did a quick Google search this past weekend because I was curious about different areas of the Rust Belt and like how it's all divided between like, oh, this is specifically a heavy industry and this is specifically this sector. And the Britannica article is Bethlehem Steel.
Yeah.
Can you talk about a more massive impact of when Bethlehem Steel finally left and the void that land left, right? So what I'm getting at is with that decline in heavy industry that once provided thousands of jobs just in that one area, how does that context specifically help us better understand Warehouse Valley?
I think it helps us understand it a lot, right? And like, we're like, every election year, you end up hearing about the Rust Belt, right?
Yeah.
So it's like that we opened Warehouse Valley in 2024, you know, yeah, it's a Rust Belt exhibit, really, in a way,
Yeah.
right? But it is like warehouses and warehousing and new development and the things that people are talking about, that doesn't come from nowhere, right? And as historians, one of the things we try to do is find longer themes, right? Like a lot of, I think like if you're not a historian or you're not history adjacent and you haven't like really done this work, you might think like, oh, history is names and dates and things we know, right? It's this kind of comfortable, like someone owned this building, this date, and they did this, it happened this, and they died here, right? But like really what the work of a historian is, it's looking at the past, I mean, often the past, but it's looking at that and looking at that in a broader context. What does it tell us about now? People always say like, well, history repeats itself. History doesn't repeat itself. History rhymes is a thing I always say, right? It's like history rhymes, patterns repeat, patterns continue, right? But if you're like talking about the Lehigh Valley as this entity that changes, geographic entity,
Right.
that changes but has some commonality, right? Like my example, whenever I'm like touring people through this exhibit, is on this wall behind me over here, which is a painting by the noted Moravian painter Gustav Grunewald. So he paints, and it's an amazing, if you haven't seen it, it's in our collection, and so it's normally on display, but I think it really kind of gets a chance to shine in here. It's a painting he does in the 1850s, and it is painted south of Easton and Phillipsburg, looking north, right? And you can see it's all like very rural in the foreground. The river's kind of coming down. There are sheep and cows and all of this there, right? But like what really the point of that, and that's paired as Warehouse Valley does, it's that Grunewald painting, and then that's paired with the same view now, which is really just like built, right, with things. But
and these aren't small images either.
They're not small.
Grunewald's
big.
3 feet.
Yeah, it's really big painting. But that's kind of making a broader point, right? Because when Grunewald is painting that scene, he is capturing something that is already a changing landscape, right? He's painting Easton and Phillipsburg in the 1850s. We know, because we've been spending a lot of time now, like thinking about the 18th century in preparation for 2026 related stuff. Like Easton during the American Revolution, not so big, right? Like we're really seeing this kind of exponential growth into the 19th century. So Grunewald is painting what we could think of as early 19th century urban sprawl. And we could also think of it as a technological innovation, right? Because he is painting the canals along the Delaware that hadn't been there. He is painting trains. There's at least 4 trains in the Grunewald, right? So it's like when Grunewald is painting this painting and it's being shown originally, but then put in context with the modern one, you could at first glance think the Grunewald is idyllic, right? It is this kind of idyllic past before urban sprawl, before development, before all of these things. But no, like the Grunewald is also a painting that is really, like when you really look at it, like in close looking, right? It is really a painting that is about the changing landscape, right? And like, why is the landscape changing? The landscape is changing because you're putting trains there to move people, but also to move the products of industry, right? Bethlehem Steel, all of these things. But like, we are seeing shifts that are occurring over time, right? Like at the time of the American Revolution, like Northampton County is primarily agrarian.
Right.
That shift, I mean, it maintains its agrarianness and continues to maintain its agrarianness, but like that shifts in the 19th century. It becomes Bethlehem Steel, it becomes heavy industry, it becomes cement, it becomes slate, right?
Silk capital
Silk
of the world,
capital of the world,
slate.
slate, exactly.
Yeah.
And it's like, with these shifting realities is shifting demographic, right? Because it's like when the heavy industry leaves, then you have, economic depression, you have lack of jobs, you have, stagnation of economic conditions. And then when you have like attempts at revitalization, whatever that might look like, right? Like development, warehousing, new businesses, new industry, that exists in that context, right? Because it's like you exist in the same landscape that was once agrarian, then heavy industry. Now that's all gone. And like when you look at it, like we've become, like we have a chart of Northampton County by industry, like our largest thing is service, right? It is like healthcare and social assistance, and then education, right? Like that calibration is very different than it would have been 100 years ago,
Right.
even different than it would have been 50 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So it's like really what it's important, like we can have all sorts of thoughts about zoning and what goes where, environmental impact, but like, yeah, we need to, I'm not minimizing environmental impact here because the environment is very important and very fragile, but like heavy industry was very, very detrimental to the environment, right? Like there's parts of the Rust Belt that are like literally just bouncing back from heavy industry. Like I'm from coal country, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, it's, like these problems that we are discussing today are not new. That doesn't minimize the problems,
Right.
but they're not new.
Right.
I guess is the roundabout answer to that.
Perhaps in a very basic historian teacher way, you are perhaps implying that we have things to learn from the past.
I am implying that, yes.
It's like-
I think it's always very important.
Almost that is our job.
Yeah, the assessment between coal and SI.
Yes, yes. Okay. I was gonna say, let me be super nerdy for a second, but that's really
what
this whole
else?
hour.
Yeah.
That's what we do. I am fascinated in my own research with migration patterns and who moves to where because of X reasons versus who moves to somewhere else because of completely different reasons.
Right.
And speaking of the continually shifting demographics of the Lehigh Valley since its founding, really 250 plus years ago, I am so pleased in my little social historian heart that it was quite an effort on your part that Warehouse Valley is our first bilingual exhibit.
It is.
And so text panels are in both English and in Spanish. And other than just for accessibility, which is, I'm not minimizing at all here. That is another thing that I am very, very impactful about, right? Why was including Spanish specifically an intentional choice on your end? And as you're just like shot laser beams out of your eyes here.
Because it's true, right? There are people in the valley whose native language is Spanish. Hard stop.
Not
right?
debatable. Yeah.
But my follow-up to that, right, is that is part of also a longer history, right? Because in many ways, the Lehigh Valley looks like America, right? There is a reason that, again, not to say like election year, but
Mhm.
there's a reason the Lehigh Valley is an electoral bellwether,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
Because like our demographics, the people here, like, yeah, they're gonna be like different than the, you know, broader nation, right? But it's like, we have always been a place where there was a plurality of opinion
Mhm.
and there is a plurality of language, right? Like
Mhm.
the earliest newspapers in the Lehigh Valley, the first daily newspaper
Mhm.
in the Lehigh Valley was in German,
Mhm.
right? So like
Until not that long
until
ago.
not that long ago, like really you see like German fall out of fashion in the world wars, right? Like people start really kind of Anglicanizing that, if you know, speaking English more, but like that there, I mean, like that there is Spanish text in this exhibit
Mhm.
is both A, to answer that demographic reality,
Mhm.
right? That like there are people that could come to this museum that are the native speakers of Spanish.
Mhm.
Do they know English? Are they learning English? Are they assimilating, you know, all of that, right? But like, is it not more accessible and friendly to give an option, right? Like, it's all of, you know, my various, very few of my actual ancestors were native speakers of English, right? So it's like
Mhm.
that story of people coming to this country with their native language and learning English.
Mhm.
It's as old as the Lehigh Valley's
Right.
been here. It's as old
Right.
as kind of everything is.
Yeah.
And I think that's exceptionally important
Mhm.
to say,
Right.
right? So it's like, I view doing Warehouse Valley as, you know, bilingual. It's exceptionally important because you want people to feel at home in this place. Like you want them to see that like our history is here,
Mhm.
especially if you think of something like warehousing, especially if you think of something like the delivery of packages,
Mhm.
especially if you think of things that exist kind of like in the broader service economy, right? Because like very often that sort, and just like painting with a really broad brush here, like that work is done by immigrants,
Mhm.
right? Or that work is done by like first generation Americans, right? So like if they're, you know, like as a curator, it's important to me that like the people of the valley, whoever they are, people in Northampton County, find something of themselves here.
Right.
But it's like very important, especially in an exhibit about this, that the people who work in warehouses could see something about themselves here. Right. So it's like that is very important. And like that idea of like a bilingual exhibit, like that's not going to go away with Warehouse Valley. Like I'm planning that the next read this, the next one is going to be readable in Spanish, right?
Right.
It's true.
And also important to recognize as historians that whether you want to say assimilation versus acculturation
Mhm.
doesn't happen overnight.
No.
Certainly almost doesn't even happen within one generation.
Right. It also gives us, right, so it's like, that's a whole conversation, but we're not really, I'm certainly not equipped to talk about today, right? But like, the truth of it is that gradual acculturation, assimilation, the idea of plurality, like linguistic plurality, cultural plurality, like that's what makes the world interesting, right? Like, I don't know.
I like learning new things. Yes, yes, we are humans on a planet. We have so much to learn
Yeah, and I think,
every single day.
yeah, but it's like if you came to Easton, if you were in the crowd in Easton in July 1776,
Mhm.
when they read the Declaration of Independence in Center Square,
Mhm.
I would bet you anything that you could be is very likely you will be in the crowd next to people whose native language is not English,
Mhm.
whose language they speak at home is not English,
Mhm.
whose language they speak on the street is not English, whose language they speak to each other doing business is not English. And we know that because there was a heavy immigration of German speaking people to the valley, right? Like the Moravians certainly, but like other German speaking people were here, right? So it's like, absolutely, it is going to, like, what we're looking at, like that crowd in July 1776, is very similar in many ways to what that crowd is like on Heritage Day today, right? And there is something historic about that
Yeah.
rhymes, I think.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. So I want to read a few of the actual comments, and then sort of what we can take away concretely that
Mhm.
this is a start, and believe me, it's a great start. To see people engaging with our work.
Yeah, it's very, very meaningful.
Right. And then the question, though, that we ask then is, well, what can you do when you leave the exhibit after you've felt all these emotions, right? So a couple of the comments, and I'm gonna quote, but shortly, because we do have a time limit. Quite a few mention that warehouses are, to direct quote, ruining the natural landscape, taking away too much open space.
Mhm.
And one used the phrase, taking away the historical landscape, which, first of all, great phrase.
I
Whoever
like
wrote
that, yeah, that's
Great
like a
phrase.
canoodle on that for a while, yeah.
But also, that's something that the historical landscape specifically, there's a very strong activist community locally that is trying to protect that.
Mhm.
Another card said, it's so sad and irreversible. But I want to pause on that for a minute as the historian pointer finger comes out here. As historians will tell you, no, stop. History was never made by being complacent, right? So within the exhibit, free to take as an answer to that is a rack card. Let me just switch back so I can make sure I see her. It says, take action. What can I do?
And that's that Grunewald mentioned before.
In a very small scale.
Yeah,
So.
yeah.
So this lists action steps that anybody can take from whatever your background is. If you're new to this topic, if you've been involved in this topic for longer than arguably some of us have been alive here, how can you become more informed, more involved in the community? What are some of those direct steps that you can take?
I mean, like the take action thing, right? Like the story, like, let's say you are someone who is, you can fall either way in this, right? Like you think we need more warehousing, you think we need more development, you think we shouldn't do more warehousing, etc. The answer to that is simple, right? The answer to that is local elections and local government matter, right? Again, just out of an election year. It is a recurrent theme in the American democracy that we care, and by we, I mean the American people, we care especially about presidential election years. Then we care about midterm election years. And we don't necessarily care as much for the elections in between, nor do we care as much for primaries, where people are running to run in the general, right? That's where this happens, right? Like plans get made, zoning rules are passed, plans are canceled, waterways are saved, environment is protected, new industry comes at local meetings, right? So it's like, this is one of those things, like, if you feel passionate about this and like passionate about how the landscape looks, or passionate about like whatever change you want to see in your community, the short of it is like, you don't do that by complaining about it on Facebook or complaining about it angrily among your friends or kind of grumbling about it as you drive. You do that either A, at the ballot box, B, at a local government meeting, or C, by running yourself.
Yes.
Right? By being an activist in some way, right? So it's like, if this is something that is concerning to you as a historic trend,
Mhm.
or if it's something that you see in others, you can look at this from a variety of perspectives, right? There's nuance here.
Mhm.
You want more local jobs,
Mhm.
agreed, right?
Hard to argue with
Hard to
that.
argue with that. That happens by being engaged with local government. Absolutely, it does.
Mhm.
Federal government matters, right?
Mhm.
And state government matters, but like that kind of sausage being made, that happens locally, right?
Mhm.
So it's like, be engaged, the very least read meeting minutes in local news, right? And like local news is a whole other thing, right? Because it's like, I mean, that's a thing for read this, but it's like absolutely be engaged in local news, but like also be aware of the environment of local news, right? That it's like we have shifted from private newspapers covering like, you know, localized regions, a plurality of newspapers to really a lot of news being covered by like the same conglomerate, right? So it's like vibrant local news is exceptionally important.
Mhm.
So it's like ultimately like be engaged in a variety of ways.
Mhm.
I don't know.
Yeah, without getting really into the weeds too. But I'm going to link in the chat, and I know, Tony threw in, a website link as well, but on the, back of the card, there are two QR codes for the Penn Future Community Toolkit for Logistics Ordinance Guide. But I can speak today.
That's a hard one.
As well as the Lehigh Valley News primer on PA land use.
Yeah.
So, these are both, in my opinion, really excellent places to start, like up from the basics, like what is a land ordinance? What is a variance? What does that mean?
Right.
What is your municipality's land development process? Because it's a process. It doesn't just start from.
You know,
nothing.
just clap on a warehouse of beers.
Right. So I will add those two, perhaps. And we did have a comment that, yes, we know the winds are a bit distracting today. We also have a sign right outside this window that
We are also distracted
we
by
know. Yeah, so this will be, again, I usually mention this at the end, but this will be up on YouTube with captioning. So if you're having a difficult time hearing us, we are gonna post the link as well onto our Facebook and our Instagram. So
Yeah.
again, accessibility is key here, because
Yeah.
why are we doing this if most people can't access it? Which is the point of this series anyway, that it is accessible. Now, we would be remiss if we didn't also mention Warehouse Valley's companion exhibit downstairs. Tim Hare, I saw Easton the way it could be. Tim was known, a lot of folks either knew Tim as an architect or as an LGBT rights activist, but he was also a very avid historical preservationist who cared about the historical landscape.
Right.
And in many ways, that exhibit is in direct communication with Warehouse Valley.
Absolutely.
So one of the things that gets me so much about Tim's exhibit is how his work was so grounded in this unshakable care and love for his community.
Yes.
How can we take that same drive and that love with us after we've experienced the whole range of emotions of these exhibits?
Well, I think I've kind of wondered that too, right? And I think part of it goes to an element of the Tim Hare exhibit that I added because I enjoy it, and I think people enjoy it, which is, and this is going to sound like it's unconnected, but I promise it is. Tim wrote extensively haiku.
Yes.
Right. Really, and like, I'm not gonna ever pretend to be like a poetry expert, but like haiku is about the landscape, really. Or like you're, you know, like who's thinking about that, right? His haiku vary in subject, but an element of what those haiku do is they're the ones I pulled some that are in the exhibit, but just kind of in general, they are these like beautiful observations of the mundane. You know, like there's a series of them where he is like writing haiku sitting in center square, right? And like some of it I think is like haiku, even like before I was born, right? But it's like, you read the haiku and you can feel like what he felt there, right? But like the point of that, the point of why I'm bringing up the haiku, right, is because like in Tim's haiku, there is observation,
Mhm.
but there is also this joy, and at times just like an understanding of like the here and now, right? Like the moment in which he is, because that's also what like haiku is about, like that moment, right? And I think like taking something away from that is right, like like appreciate the landscape, right? And appreciate your being in it, right? Like appreciate that like now, like the valley of 100 years ago probably had air that was less breathable than today in certain parts of it, right? Like, but like really kind of part of it is, and what the haikus do is like there is a joy to it, but there's also this like understanding that like things happen at like a local level, things happen at a state level, things happen at all these different levels. But like I think for Tim, and I think like something to be taken away from that, it's like these things happen, but you aren't necessarily the passive recipient of their happening, right? Like there is a like acknowledgement of change. There is an acknowledgement of things needing to be preserved. There is an acknowledgement of like the here and now, but like there is both this acceptance of that reality, but also a realization that that can be impacted, right? So I think like why like in my head the Tim Hare exhibit pairs really well with this exhibit, right? And it's almost like I thought of it this way, but it really kind of fell together. It truly did. It's that like this is the exhibit, this is the big, right? Like this is the contextualizing, this is the change, this is meant to spark conversation. And Tim's the what do you do? Right? Like the story of Tim is going to local meeting, like to meeting, going and like doing the I don't want to say the dirty work, but doing the hard work, right? Like doing the standing on the street corner with a sign and saying an unpopular thing, right? Like
Which
that
takes guts, whatever side you
that
follow.
takes work, that
Yeah.
takes having a sense that like you are doing something, right? So it's like that goes back to my like civic engagement right? Like it's that, right? It's he shows us the possibility of civic engagement, right? Which is ultimately that like if you want to see change in the world, like for Tim, that's historic preservation and moving towards like marriage equality and like new, like an understanding of like what equality can mean under the law. You do that by changing it. Like you do that by demanding that change, right? So it's like that none of us are passive recipients of change. Yeah.
Right. And even in, sometimes you read a haiku and you think, oh, this is so lovely. It reminds me of the birds. But even the person who is writing the haiku, in this case, we see it very clearly with Tim's haikus. The observation, the writing, the care that went into it is all a very active process.
Absolutely.
The learning, especially, even being in this exhibit, it's because it's nice, sometimes you look at a piece of art and you're like, oh, that's nice, that makes me happy, and then you move on. Even that should be an active process. Like, I mean, I realize this is coming from me as an academic and as a historian, but everything that you see every day, if you're not truly engaging with it, if you're not like, maybe you see something that makes you angry, but it's going to be at so much of a deeper level if you can articulate why you feel that way.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's like as because it's like I'm an artist, right? I went to art school. After this, I'm going and I teach art history, right? So it's like for me, like none of these paintings are, unless like my kind of like art, right? Like what art is, right? Like art isn't a pretty thing you put on a wall. Like art is a primary document about the time in which it's made. It exists in a context. It tells us so much about the time it was made, regardless of what it is, right? So it's like these paintings, like they're beautiful, like that painting on loan from Goodstown over there. Like that's an amazingly beautiful painting, but it's also a document of the time in which it was
Exactly.
painted, right? It shows us, like, is it showing what it actually was? Is it idealized? Is it a composite view? Is it this, is it that, right? Go on and on about that, but it's like showing us what someone viewed their world as at that moment.
Right.
Right, so it's like, that is as much a primary document
Right.
as a letter, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like, absolutely,
Yeah.
right? So it's like, but what I kind of do enjoy about this exhibit as like an art person, it's like the paintings, but like we've also had created primary documents that now talk to these paintings, right?
Yes.
By having a photographer, Luis from LBJ Media,
Mhm.
take the pictures that are the companion photos to the paintings. We've now created a body of photographs
Yep.
that are themselves a historical document,
Yes.
right? That tell us about the time in which they were. So yeah, I don't quite know how I got on that zag, but yeah, it's
Yeah.
important to document and be aware of it.
Right, and it's certainly not saying that everyone who comes and views this exhibit has to take that immediate historical lens of thinking, well, maybe it wasn't made intending to be a historic piece,
Absolutely.
but we can
Yeah.
learn from it
Absolutely.
in that case.
Absolutely.
But really, what I'm trying to say here is never be passive. Can I speak today? Never be a passive observer,
No,
regardless of what it is.
the work of historianing is active work, but also the work of like existing in society / being a citizen is
It's
active.
very active work.
Yeah, so
Yes.
like that's kind of important.
Yes. All right, so last intentional thing that I want to touch on, and then we can, devolve from there as we always do. The last comment that I want to read specifically from the cards is very simple, but it's very profound. And, ironically, we went on that historical context.
What is history?
Yeah.
How does history do for us? Yeah.
Yes, and as usual, we just naturally skipped into this. But the comment reads, it makes you stop and think about what was, and I'm reading this so I can get it right because it's beautiful. It makes you stop and think about what was and now what is and where we are going. Whoever wrote that, you'd make a great historian.
Yeah, it's good. It's
Yeah.
good. Yeah, put that on the bumper sticker.
Yeah.
That's the,
Yeah.
if this exhibit got someone to think that, I
Right.
feel I have done my job.
Right.
That's all, as a curator, like a historian who ultimately like, I'm obviously like deep in the academic weeds, right? But like where I find the most value as a historian is presenting things to quote unquote regular people.
Right.
And having them have a thought about it, right? So it's like, that to me is like, that's the best comment I could have, in my opinion.
Right, because it's one thing, to spend how many years and years in academia
Yeah,
studying.
it's like knowing all the various theory and
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
we got to do it to get where we are,
Yes.
but like also at the same time, if regular people can't understand what the hell we're talking about, why are we doing this?
exactly, it's
Yeah.
pointless.
Anything else that you want to add that perhaps I didn't cover? Anything you want folks to take out of this exhibit that we really didn't?
So a thing that struck me, and a thing I think about with this exhibit, and a thing I think about with doing something modern like this, and maybe kind of exhibits broadly, is there can be a predilection, a hope, a preconceived notion that like you don't want to see or experience an exhibit that will make you feel unhappy, right? That will make you feel bad. That is something that you don't want to think about, right? But it's like, I think that's important, right? Because it's like, it's important to acknowledge what people expect a museum experience to be, right? But what, like my thought on it, right? Like where I would like question that or like push back on that a little bit. It's like, if an exhibit makes you feel good, if all of the exhibit makes you feel good, if you don't leave that having a questioning thought, if you don't leave that having a, like, oh, maybe we as a society should think about this, or like,
Mhm.
you know, like, this isn't necessarily something I wanted to see, but this is something that was important for me to see.
Mhm.
Like, if you're doing that, you're not being presented with A, history,
Right.
or B, the reality of the world, right? Because like,
Yeah.
I know historians say this all the time, I say this too, but like, if you're looking at history and history only makes you feel good, you're not
You're not
doing
making
it
it-
right.
no. Yeah,
You're
yeah.
not. And like, we can talk about all sorts of things associated with
Yep.
that, right?
Yep.
But like, history is wonderful, right? Like, I've obviously like dedicated my life to this, right? But like,
Mhm.
it should challenge you.
Right.
And like, I think it's important for I mean, like, our mission is to inspire community conversation,
Yep, yep.
right? Those conversation.
And what is this?
And the,
What that?
yeah, and the importance of like having a conversation, the importance of having a conversation with deferring opinion, something of which we as a society are very bad at these days, right?
Yes.
But like, the idea that like, that is how civil society functions, right? Like, it kind of like ingrained in our mission is how society, democracy,
Mhm.
civilization functions, right? So it's
Yeah.
like, that conversation doesn't always have to be pleasant,
Mhm.
right? And in fact, very often it isn't, right? So it's like, ultimately, like, I think some exhibits should make you feel good. Some exhibits are a celebration, right? Like, I think Tim Hare makes you leave Tim Hare feeling good, right? Certainly I do, because I feel like, you know, I'm
Yeah.
happy with it, right? I'm happy that it was a important impact, especially for Earl, right?
Right.
But,
And especially from the perspective, not to cut you off, but I'm also gonna lose the thought if I
Yeah.
don't. But that, especially when as we've been focusing more on exhibits that aren't just, you know, a landscape painting is beautiful from 250 years ago. Our job is to make sure that doesn't stay 200 years ago. Right.
and
The rants never end. Let's just be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna go on another tangent, but we have 8 minutes before Zoom kicks us out, so, yeah. I will read off a couple of comments. Tony added in a website for being more informed about the warehouse going in on Wood Avenue.
Good, yeah.
So that is, I'm gonna read this really slowly so I get it right. Stopwoodwarehouse.wordpress.com. It's in the chat, so go, if I said it incorrectly, please
Thanks.
go look down there.
Thanks, Tony.
Yes, absolutely. I did add in the guidebooks and excellent quote. Thank you, Tony. How can you know where you're going if you don't know where you've been?
Right, you are.
That's it. That's what we do. So any other thoughts as we wrap up? Look at that. We're actually wrapping up with a slight bit of time to spare.
This is a first for us, sir.
I'm frankly surprised we haven't actually been kicked off in previous.
I know, we
So-
do good.
So, thank you to everyone for tuning in today. Thank you for being active participants in civil society. As a reminder, I'll give you a couple of reminders because that's what I do here. Please get involved in some fashion in your community, whether that is simply tuning in, say, to a Zoom conversation of your local city council, or showing up to city council meetings, or you can call your senators, for example. You can call your local
That could
representatives.
be fun, yes.
You could run.
Run yourself.
You could do it. You could indeed that. Just talk to each other. We're here. We're here for you. Oh, no, the comment that I thought about 5 minutes ago and then left my brain. See, it came back. It came back. Being at the front desk and hearing a lot of comments from Destination Northampton County, a lot of the things that I hear, because it's an open floor plan area, excuse me, is people saying, oh, I never thought about it that way before, or, oh, I never made that connection before. And every time I hear that, I'm not sure if people know that I can hear them downstairs, but please know that up at my desk, I'm silently going, yes, man, if that's not like that, oh, that's why we do what we do.
So we do the thing.
That's it.
Yeah.
Tangent aside. As a reminder, conversations with the curator are held on the last Wednesday of every month at noon. You can just sit down and talk to us, just have a conversation with us. The whole point is that you, the everyday person who does not work in a museum, gets to see what happens at a museum.
Yeah.
And what it looks like when we put an exhibit together and why we made the choices that we do, to bring that to the folks in our community who matter the most. Right. You do not need to register in advance for this program. Again, accessibility is key. So please pass along the Zoom link to anybody that you know that would like to tune in. Next month, we will be discussing enslavement and abolition in Northampton County. So buckle up, everybody. We are.
Might be the first of our like talking about 18th century stuff.
Yes, as a sort of also little teaser for things that are happening down the road here.
Absolutely.
Sooner rather than later.
And as another reminder, we are in the middle of our annual membership drive.
I was getting there, Joe.
Oh, okay.
Go on, go on.
I was happy. I was like, oh, we could go back and forth. You can become a member or renew your membership at
www.sicklemuseum.org.
Yes. That membership goes a long way towards supporting our work, keeping the lights on, doing the various things that we do up to and including this.
And not only in becoming a member, but there are so many ways to help us fulfill our mission in general, such as just one-time donations. You can sponsor an artifact. You can sponsor a program.
You could even sponsor this.
You could indeed. That would make my little historian heart
we'd be so happy.
very happy. So as I have to say, as this will go on YouTube, and I gotta say, this gets more satisfying the more you do it, but please do like this video and subscribe to our channel. No, I just, you know, it really does help because then like analytically on the back end, I'm such a sucker for data and like seeing analytics and seeing charts. So it really does help me to see what people like and what people are tuning into.
And if you do like and subscribe on our YouTube and you have younger people in your life, our delightful education coordinator, Beth, does book readings.
Lovely.
On our YouTube as well. Lovely, calm book readings. Yes. Even if you want to feel calm, you can log in and listen to Beth read a book and you will feel calm.
Yes, it actually, not to
it is very
be that person, but it does help me like do my dishes.
It's very
if someone is reading very calm book in the background.
Yeah.
Yes. 10/10 recommending, especially in 2025. So thank you to everyone again for tuning in. We will see you next month. And before I tell you the wrong date, February 26th at noon. That is the last Wednesday of the month. We will be here talking about the Gradual Abolition Act of 1780 and what that meant for the enslaved men, women, and children, particularly in Easton.
Yep.
Maybe we will.
Hey, we'll talk about that too.
Story.
I don't know. Yeah. Maybe. Yeah.
That's for next month.
Yes.
Okay. Anyway, before we get kicked off, maybe. Thanks everybody again. I will have this up on YouTube and captioned as quick as I can, and we will make sure to post it everywhere that you can see it. Share it with folks. The exhibit is up until July. Please feel free to continue to come in, leave your comments. We are saving all of these, as we said, to be part of our archive then after, especially after the exhibit comes down. Yep. And we will see everybody next month. Please be careful out there in that wind today and
blown away to Oz.
Yeah, you and our sign out there.
Yeah.
All right. So we'll see you next month. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, everyone.